My son-in-law grabbed my wrist with his right hand in the middle of my own living room and said in a low voice, almost friendly, like someone explaining a simple math problem to a person who's taking too long to catch on, "Pretty soon all of this is going to be ours." I didn't answer. I looked at my hand, at his fingers wrapped around my wrist. I thought about how many animals I'd held like that over 40 years of practice. Firm, never rough, just enough to keep them from pulling away before I finished what needed doing. Then I gathered my things slowly, like I had the rest of the afternoon ahead of me, and walked out without looking back. The next morning, my daughter raised her juice glass at my kitchen table. It was already her table, judging by the way she settled into it, and laughed with her husband. Finally, the old man's gone. She didn't know I was standing on the other side of the kitchen door, reaching for the wool jacket I'd left hanging on the wall. And she didn't know that an envelope was already moving through the mail that same morning. She didn't know about the man parked in the white sedan across the street, who would stay there for 2 more days, writing down times in a spiral notebook. But I already knew all of it, because the woman I loved for 38 years had anticipated every single one of those moves long before I understood that the game had already started. If you're hearing this for the first time and something in that sentence stopped you, subscribe to the channel. These stories aren't about revenge. They're about what happens when a man decides to stop pretending he didn't see what he saw. Hit like, leave a comment. Now come back with me to Harlan County, Kentucky. February, the kind of cold that cracks the corners of your lips and fills the air with the smell of wood smoke coming out of every house on the road. My name is Earl Raymond Combs. I'm 63 years old. I was born in Harlan County, grew up in Harlan County, and spent my whole life building a large animal veterinary practice in this county that started with a folding table, a scalpel I bought on a payment plan, and a bull named Senator that my neighbor Cletus Vaughn hauled in on a flatbed because no other vet in the area would take a call on a Saturday afternoon. I treated Senator. Cletus never forgot it. And that's how Combs Animal Practice built its name. Not through advertising, not through pricing, but through being available when everybody else wasn't. Today, the practice sits out on Route 38 toward Cumberland, in a cinder block building I helped raise myself back in '93. I've got 2 vets on staff besides myself, a receptionist named Loretta, who's been there 14 years and knows every farmer in the county by their handshake, and a schedule that rarely has an opening on Mondays and Tuesdays. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because you need to understand what was at stake and what Travis Holt saw when he first looked at me. Saturday mornings, when I don't have a farm call, I walk down to May's Diner on Main Street in the town of Harlan. I order the same thing every time, black coffee, strong, with a biscuit that May's daughter Linda has been making the same way since the place opened. I sit and read the print newspaper for half an hour, not the news on my phone. The print edition, with the fold marks and the ink that gets on your fingers. It was something I did with my wife, Nadine. She read the arts section and the local announcements. She'd pass me the pages with a small pencil mark next to the articles she thought I ought to read. After she died, I kept going alone. Still do. Same coffee, same biscuit. And I leave the seat beside me empty without having to explain it to anyone. Nadine Combs, born Nadine Jean Markham. 56 years old when she died. Ovarian cancer. 11 months from the diagnosis to the last night, her hand in mine, in a room at Harlan ARH Hospital, the ceiling fan turning slow and a stripe of orange light coming under the blinds. That was the winter 4 years ago. Brenda, our only child, was 31 at the time. She'd been seeing Travis Holt for just over a year. They got married 6 months after Nadine passed, small ceremony at his family's property over in Bell County, and I paid for the reception, paid for her dress, gave them the down payment on an apartment on Central Street as a wedding gift. $42,000 I'd been setting aside in a CD since 2015. I don't regret any of it. What I do regret is not paying closer attention to the way Travis walked through the rooms of my house when he came to dinner on Friday nights. Not like someone admiring a place, like someone taking measurements from memory. Nadine and I got married in 1986. She was 22. I was 25. She was the daughter of a postal worker from Lynch, and she had the habit of writing everything down in hardcover notebooks: expenses, recipes, plans, things she wanted to do, things she didn't want to forget. When she died, there were 37 of those notebooks in a cardboard box lined with blue shelf paper inside the bedroom closet. I still haven't been able to read all of them. For 34 years, we shared that house on Ivy Hill Road, 3 bedrooms, big backyard, a black walnut tree in the corner she planted the first year we moved in, and that today has a trunk thicker than my chest. She kept the front garden. I tore up her herb bed every time I tried to help. She laughed at that with her head tilted slightly to the left, the way you do when you hear a joke you already know, but it still gets you. The house went quiet in a way that doesn't have a good explanation after she was gone. It wasn't just silence. It was the absence of a particular kind of presence. The sound of someone moving through a house with purpose, opening the refrigerator, murmuring when they read something that caught their attention. Brenda grew up in that house, learned to walk in that backyard. Broke her nose falling out of the walnut tree when she was 8. Cried on my shoulder the day she lost her first job at 23, and I told her it was going to be all right before I even knew what had happened. She was my daughter, and I was her father the way my father had been mine. No speeches, no keeping score, no putting a price on what I gave. When Nadine got sick, Brenda came and stayed a month. She helped with the first treatments, was around during the hardest days. Travis came on weekends, polite, punctual, usually bringing fruit or something from the bakery. He knew how to behave himself when it counted. I didn't understand yet that was a professional skill, not a character trait. The first thing that didn't add up was small. It was a Wednesday in August, almost 2 years after their wedding. I was at the practice when Loretta put through a call from an accounting firm in Lexington I'd never heard of. The man on the other end said he was from Bluegrass Asset Management and was calling to move forward with the valuation process for assets registered in the name of Earl Raymond Combs. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He paused, the kind of pause that tells you somebody just realized they said something they weren't supposed to, and were, nice him were, and we were, and I, and said it must be a mix-up. He hung up before I could ask anything else. I stared at the phone for a moment. Then I went back to the exam I was doing, a Tennessee walking horse with a problem in her right rear hoof, and didn't think any more about it that day. But something stayed with me. Not quite unease. More like a background noise you can hear but can't locate. 3 weeks later, Brenda called saying she wanted to talk about the future of the practice. Said she and Travis had some ideas that might be good for the business. That the market in Harlan County was growing, and maybe it was worth thinking about a formal ownership structure. I said they could come to dinner Saturday. She said it would be better at my place, that it was more comfortable for that kind of conversation. I didn't ask what kind of conversation that was. I should have asked. That Saturday, I got home at 6 in the evening. They were already there. Travis had asked Brenda for the spare key a few weeks earlier on the grounds that if I ever needed help with anything, it was better for them to have access. I'd handed it over without thinking twice. The table was set. Brenda had made pot roast with potatoes and green beans, which was what I liked. Travis was watching television with his arms stretched across the back of my sofa, with a comfort level I noticed but didn't name. We ate. I talked about the week at the practice. Travis mentioned he'd closed a big deal over in Letcher County, a rural property of nearly 200 acres. Brenda was quieter than usual, eating slowly, looking at her plate. After dinner, while I was washing the glasses at the sink, Travis got up and leaned in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed. He had that way of filling a space that had never seemed aggressive to me, and that in that moment suddenly did. He said, "Earl, we wanted to talk to you about something important. About you." I kept washing the glasses. "Go ahead. We're worried. You're working too hard for your age. A lot of physical strain, a lot of stress, a lot of driving out to farms. That's not sustainable." I set a glass in the rack. "I'm fine. We know. But the thing is, if something were to happen, and we pray it doesn't, the practice is left exposed. The building, the equipment, the client list. There's no legal structure in place to guarantee continuity." I looked at him. "I've got an attorney who handles that. With respect, Earl, a local attorney isn't the same as real estate patrimony planning. We've been in touch with a firm in Lexington that works specifically with these kinds of transitions. And that's when the background noise got loud enough for me to stop and listen. A firm in Lexington. The same office that had called 3 weeks earlier. I didn't say anything. I finished drying my hands on the dish towel. I turned to Travis and said I'd think about it. I went to the bedroom saying I was tired, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed for 23 minutes, looking at Nadine's closet that I still hadn't fully cleared out. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something colder than that. The feeling of a man looking at a floor plan and realizing the door he thought was the entrance is actually the exit. In the days that followed, I started paying attention in a different way. Not anxiously, surgically. The same attention you use when you're examining an animal that's hiding its pain. You can't trust what it shows you. You have to trust what it avoids showing you. I talked to Loretta casually, asking if she'd gotten any unusual calls at the practice over the past few weeks. She said yes. 2 calls from a firm in Lexington wanting general information about the practice's operations and the ownership status of the building. She'd said she didn't know anything and hung up. I asked if she'd written down the number. She went to the reception desk drawer and came back with a yellow sticky note with a number written by hand and the name Bluegrass Asset Management, Mr. Raymond Suttles. I folded the note and put it in my pants pocket. 3 days later, I quietly asked a clerk I knew to run a search on any court filings in my name. He called me the next day. There was an initial petition filed in Harlan Circuit Court 42 days earlier in Nenesi, in Werkau, Narakral, in Neu, a guardianship proceeding with petitioners identified as Brenda Lynn Holt and Travis Holt, alleging progressive incapacity to manage property on the part of the respondent, Earl Raymond Combs. I sat in the cab of my truck in the practice parking lot for 40 minutes. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Brenda. I didn't drive to the courthouse. I picked up my coffee thermos from the passenger seat, drank it until it went cold, and walked back inside to see the next patient, a black Angus cow with acute bloat that a rancher had hauled in on an emergency trailer. I treated the cow. I locked up the practice at 8 that night, and then I called Arthur Crane. Arthur and I met in 1979 in 7th grade. We were both sons of men who worked for themselves, his father, an accountant, mine, a hardware store owner, and we had the same irritating habit of arriving early to everything. We became friends because of that. We kept the friendship for the next 45 years for reasons that are hard to explain and have to do with the kind of thing that only exists between people who knew each other before they became who they are. Arthur lives in Lexington now, has since he opened his practice in the 90s, CPA with a specialization in estate law and asset protection, a field he drifted into gradually as his clients aged and their children started asking questions that had more to do with inheritance than gratitude. He'd already handled a complicated probate for me when my father died back in 2004. He knew my financial situation better than anyone alive besides me. When I called, it was almost 9 at night. He picked up on the second ring. He said, "Earl, I was waiting for you to call, Sanmar." I paused. "What do you mean?" He said, "Come to Lexington." Not over the phone. I went the next day, a Thursday, left Harlan at 6 in the morning, drove the Daniel Boone Parkway with the sky still gray and the mountains sitting dark on both sides. I got to Arthur's office at 8:40. He was waiting with a pot of coffee and a thin folder on his desk. I sat down across from him. He stood for a moment, looking at me with the expression he gets when he has to say something he knows is going to cost the other person something. "You know what's going on," he said. It wasn't a question. "I know part of it. Then I'll tell you the rest." He opened the folder. The guardianship petition was filed 42 days ago. I found out 38 days ago when a colleague in Frankfurt called me saying a client of mine had come up in a proceeding being handled by a Lexington firm he'd had problems with before. Bluegrass Asset Management. That's right. He looked at me. "Earl, their argument is that you're showing signs of cognitive decline that compromise your ability to manage property. They cite 3 incidents: a consultation that was allegedly mishandled, a financial decision that was allegedly unsound, and a dispute with a supplier. None of the 3 has any legal substance. But in a guardianship proceeding, depending on the judge and the evaluations, you can spend months responding to this while they request emergency conservatorship over your assets. I stared at the folder. Who signed the petition? Brenda and Travis. I didn't say anything for a while. Arthur stayed quiet too, which is what he does when he understands that another man's silence is a way of processing, not avoiding. After a while he said, "There's something else." Which is the reason I said I'd been waiting for your call. He stood up and went to the steel filing cabinet in the corner of the office. He opened it with a key he kept in his vest pocket. He took out a large envelope, craft paper, sealed with wax, with my name written by hand in handwriting I recognized before Arthur had even walked it back over to me. It was Nadine's handwriting. I took the envelope with both hands. "When did she give you this?" I asked. 2 months before she died. Arthur came back to his chair. "She came to see me alone, without telling you. Said she'd done something that needed to be kept until the right moment. She told me what that moment was." "What moment was that?" "If you called me telling me you were being pressured by Brenda and Travis over the property, or if I found out by any other means that it was happening." I looked at him. She knew. She didn't know for certain, but she knew her daughter. And she knew Travis. Arthur crossed his arms. "And she knew you well enough to know you wouldn't see it coming in time if there wasn't somebody on the outside watching." I held the envelope for a while. The weight of it felt like more than paper. "Can I open it here?" "You can open it wherever you want. It's yours." I opened it slowly, without tearing the flap, running my finger under the wax seal the way I do with anything I don't want to damage. Inside were 3 documents and a letter. I read the letter first. Nadine's handwriting was small and slanted slightly to the right, the same way she wrote in those hardcover notebooks still sitting in the bedroom closet. The letter had no date. It started without a greeting, straight to the point, which was her way. She wrote that she loved me in a way that didn't need ceremony to be real, and that for that reason she was going to get right to it. She wrote that she had concerns about Travis that she'd never been able to put into words out loud without it sounding like jealousy or a snap judgment. That she'd spent 2 years watching the way he moved when he walked into the house, the way he asked questions about the practice and the building with a casualness that seemed rehearsed. That she'd noticed Brenda getting smaller around him. Not violently, but gradually, in a way Nadine recognized because she'd seen it happen to other women throughout her life. She wrote that she didn't know if she was right, but that she didn't want to die without doing something in case she was. And then she described what she had done. In the last 4 months of her life, 4 months when I was taking care of her, driving her to chemo, making meals she could barely eat, sleeping on a cot beside the bed so I'd wake fast if she needed me. In those last 4 months, between one appointment and the next, Nadine had worked with Arthur to put together a complete legal asset protection structure. The practice had been transferred to a family LLC in which I was the sole member with voting authority. The house on Ivy Hill Road had been filed as a homestead with an exemption recorded. The small parcel of land I owned out past Loyal had been placed in a life estate in my name, with remainder to a specific charitable organization upon my death, with no ability to transfer to heirs. And there was a 4th document, a specific, durable power of attorney giving Arthur Crane authority to represent my interests in any legal proceeding involving my property with a 10-year term, renewable. The letter ended like this: "You were never good at noticing when someone was getting into what's yours. That's a good quality, Earl. It means you don't think about people that way. But sometimes you need to notice. That's why I'm leaving Arthur watching. Take care of the animals. Take care of yourself. I love you the way only we know." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I held the letter for a while without any sense of how long it was. When I looked up, Arthur was staring out the window with the discretion of a man who understands that certain moments belong to someone else. "She told me about the LLC while I was preparing the documents," he said, still looking out. "Said you were going to complain she hadn't told you. Asked me to tell you she was sorry for keeping the secret, but that she wasn't sorry for the decision." I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. "And the guardianship petition?" Arthur turned back to me. "It has no subject. The practice is in the LLC. The house has the homestead filing. The land parcel is in the life estate with a specific remainder clause. There are no available assets for emergency conservatorship. He opened his hands. They built a house to take that doesn't exist anymore. I drove back to Harlan that afternoon. I didn't call Brenda. I didn't call Travis. I stopped at May's Diner, ordered a coffee and a biscuit, sat at the same table as always, and stayed there for 40 minutes. The seat beside me was still empty, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. Nadine had been at that table with me in a way that time doesn't erase. She thought about me, protected what was ours, solved a problem she wasn't even sure was going to exist, and she'd done all of it quietly, without alarm, without making me carry the weight she was already carrying herself. That was who she was. That was what I'd lost, and also what I still had. In the days that followed, I let the routine continue as normal. Went to the practice, saw patients, ate dinner alone on Friday. Saturday morning, I went to May's, ordered the coffee, read the paper. Travis sent me a text on Sunday asking to talk about that proposal we'd discussed. I replied that I was busy that week, but we'd connect soon. I didn't feel the urge to blow up. I didn't feel the urge to call Brenda and ask her how she could have done that. I felt something different, a cold, specific clarity about what needed to happen and about the right time to let it happen. Arthur had advised me to take no action yet, said the guardianship petition was technically without a subject, but that the formal withdrawal required a specific procedural moment. There was a deadline. There was a hearing scheduled, and there was a way to close everything out in a way that would be definitive, not just legally, but in terms of what Brenda and Travis would understand had happened. We agreed I would wait. I'm good at waiting. 40 years of large animal practice teaches you that the right moment to act is determined by the patient, not the doctor. On a Monday in September, Loretta came to get me at the back of the practice with the expression I'd learned to read over 14 years. There was someone waiting she didn't quite know how to categorize. He was a man about 50, in suit, thin briefcase, wire-rimmed glasses. He said he was a court-appointed evaluator assigned to conduct an asset assessment in connection with the proceeding I was already aware of. I invited him into the exam room. He looked around the space, the stainless steel tables, the equipment, the patient files organized on shelving, with the expression of someone who had pictured something different. He asked if I was aware of the proceeding. I said I was. He asked if I had legal representation. I said I did. I handed him Arthur's card. The evaluator looked at the card, then at me, and made that pause I'd come to recognize, the pause of a man who realizes the situation is more complicated than his briefing suggested. We went through the assessment. I answered every question with precision and calm. At the end, he put everything in his briefcase, shook my hand, and said the report would be ready in 20 days. After he left, Loretta appeared in the doorway with her arms crossed. "What was that about, Earl?" "Nothing that isn't already handled, Loretta." She looked at me for a second. Miss Nadine would have liked that answer. I didn't respond. I went back to the files. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in October at 2 in the afternoon at Harlan Circuit Court. I arrived at 1:45 with Arthur, who had driven down from Lexington that morning. We were both in suits, mine dark gray, his navy, and we got there before everyone else. Brenda and Travis arrived right at 2. She was in a black skirt and white blouse, hair pulled back, with the expression of someone making a conscious effort to appear neutral. Travis, in a tan suit, next to an attorney I didn't recognize, young, confident, new briefcase. Brenda saw me in the waiting area and stopped for half a second. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. We went into the courtroom. The judge was a man about 45, with the tired expression of someone who does this every day and is very rarely surprised. He read the petition, then he read the response Arthur had filed. Then he was quiet for a moment, long enough that Travis's attorney shifted in his chair. The judge asked the attorney whether they were aware of the asset protection structure filed with the LLC. The attorney said they were. The judge asked on the basis of which available asset the action had been filed. The attorney began explaining the theory of the case, that the issue wasn't the assets themselves, but the respondent's capacity to manage them. The judge interrupted him with a politeness that was, in fact, a closed door. He said the evaluator's report had concluded that the respondent demonstrated full capacity in every dimension assessed, that the asset structure presented by the defense showed not just management capacity but sophisticated planning, that there was no subject for the action, and that, on the contrary, there was sufficient indication of bad faith litigation to warrant sanctioning the petitioners for frivolous filing. And Travis looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at his papers. Brenda stared at the table. The judge dismissed the petition and closed the hearing. We walked out to the hallway. Arthur went ahead. He knew I needed a moment, and I moved slowly, with my folder under my arm, through the old courthouse corridor that smelled like mildew and aging paper. Brenda caught up to me before the stairs. She said quietly, "Dad." I turned around. Her eyes were red. The expression I'd learned to read over 32 years, since she was a little girl who had broken something and didn't know how to admit it, was on her face like it had come back from a long way off. She said, "How long did you know?" I said, "Longer than you'd think." She kept looking at me. Travis was standing farther back with the attorney's briefcase in his hand, not coming any closer. She said, barely a sound, "Did Mom know too?" "Yes." She closed her eyes for a second. She didn't say anything else. Neither did I. I walked down the stairs, out into the October sun, hitting the courthouse steps, and went to where Arthur had parked. He was leaning against the car, drinking from a water bottle. He asked, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm all right." He looked at me. "Really?" I thought for a second. In a way that's going to take a while to fully understand. "But yeah." He nodded. We got in the car. He dropped me at the bus station where I'd catch the coach back to Harlan. Before I got out, he said, "She left a verbal message too. One she asked me to pass along in person if the day came." I looked at him. "What was it?" She said, "Tell him I knew he was going to stay quiet." And that was exactly what needed to happen. I got out of the car and walked into the station. Brenda and Travis separated 4 months later. I wasn't responsible for that. I didn't do anything about it. I heard through a neighbor that the proceeding had accelerated something that was already cracked, that the strategy had been more his than hers, that she'd signed papers without fully understanding what she was signing, that when everything fell apart, his first move was to protect his own position. That didn't give me satisfaction. It gave me a specific, quiet sadness. The kind you feel when something you hoped wasn't true confirms that it was. Brenda came to find me in November. She knocked on the front door on a Saturday afternoon while I was in the backyard trimming the grass around the base of Nadine's walnut tree. We sat on the porch for almost 2 hours. She talked. I listened. I didn't say everything was fine, because it wasn't. I didn't say it was going to be fine, because I didn't know. I said she was my daughter, and that wasn't changing, but that some things were going to need time to come back together, and that time wasn't a punishment. It was just what it was. She left crying. I stayed on the porch until dark, drinking black coffee from an old mug I'd had since the 90s, listening to the birds that disappear when the sun goes down and come back when it comes up, without any pattern I've ever been able to figure out. The house was quiet the way it gets, but there was something different in that silence. It was more livable. Today the practice is still out on Route 38. Loretta is still there, with her sticky notes and her drawer full of important phone numbers. The 2 vets on staff are turning into good doctors, which means they bother me less and less with questions they already know the answer to. Saturday mornings I go to May's Diner. The coffee is still black, still strong. The biscuit is still the same. I leave the seat beside me empty. But sometimes, when I finish the paper and sit looking out at the street before I get up, it feels like Nadine is still there, reading the art section beside me, with her pencil mark next to the articles she thinks I ought to read. She was right about a lot of things, and about the most important thing of all, she was right without ever having to say it. She just acted while she still could. There's something this whole period taught me that took me 63 years to understand. I spent my whole life believing that taking care of people was enough, that if you work, provide, show up, give, people recognize it for what it is and act accordingly. That love produces love, that loyalty produces loyalty, that what you plant, you harvest. That's true. But it's not the whole story. The whole story is that some people, not out of pure evil, but out of some combination of weakness, greed, and a lack of courage, learn to calculate what you're worth before they feel what you mean. And as long as those two things are aligned, everything seems fine. You cover the down payment, you show up at the hospital, you get in the truck at 6 in the morning when they call, and they stay. The problem starts when the calculation changes. When what you're worth in their accounting, in terms of property, utility, position, starts to look more accessible without you than with you. I'm not saying Brenda didn't love me. I'm saying she loved Travis more than she loved me at a specific moment in time, and that Travis knew exactly where to press to make that love serve him. That's a form of betrayal that doesn't have a clean name. It's not cruelty. It's calculation with not enough affection to contain it. And the thing I learned, late, but I learned it, is that the best response to that kind of thing isn't to explode. It's not to confront. It's not to make a speech. It's to have the right structure in place before the pressure arrives. Nadine understood that with the clarity of a woman looking in from outside of time. She wasn't going to be there to protect me, so she built the protection before she left. If you're listening to this and you have someone in your life who depends on you, a son, a daughter, a partner, anyone you share what you've built with, the question Nadine asked me without ever asking out loud is this: if you stepped out of the picture tomorrow, would what you've built be protected? Not from enemies. From people who love you in a way that sometimes isn't enough. That's a question only you can answer. But it matters that you answer it while you still have time to do something about it. Have you been through something like this? Someone you took care of your whole life who, under pressure, showed you their math was always different from yours? What would you have done in Earl's position, before the hearing, in that courthouse hallway, when Brenda said his name? And this question I've been carrying since I read Nadine's letter. Do you believe people reveal who they really are in other people's moments of crisis, not their own, but yours? Leave your answer in the comments. I take that seriously. I read every one. If this story reached something in you, hit like. If you know someone going through a moment like this, someone who needs to hear that it's possible to stay standing without having to shout to prove you still are, share this video with them. Subscribe to the channel. Every week there's a new story, and all of them, at the bottom of it, are about the same thing: what a man finds out he still has when he thought he'd lost everything. Until next time.